what I was playing, Lane. Sorry for that, for your sake. I don't play accurately. Anyone can play. As far as the piano is concerned, sentiment is my forte.
Yes, sir.
I do science for life. Oh, and speaking of the science of life, have you got the cucumber sandwiches cut for Lady Bracknell?
Yes.
Ah. And by the way, Lane, I see from your book that on last Thursday night when Lord Shorman and Mr. Worthing were dining with me, 8 bottles of champagne are entered as having been consumed.
Yes, sir. 8 bottles and a pint.
And why is it that at a bachelor's establishment, the servants invariably drink the champagne? Ask me for information.
I attribute it to the superior quality of the wine, sir. I have often observed that in married households, the champagne is really of first-rate brand.
Good heavens, is marriage so demoralizing as that?
I believe it is a very unpleasant state, sir. I've only been married once. That was a consequence of a misunderstanding between myself and a young person.
Yes, I don't know how much interested in your family life, Lane.
No, sir. It is not a very interesting subject. I really think of it myself.
Very natural, I'm sure. That will do, Lane, thank you. Really, Lane's views on marriage seem somewhat lax. Really, if the lower orders don't set us a good example, what on earth is the use of them? They seem, as a class, to have absolutely no sense of moral responsibility.
Mr. Ernest Worthing.
How are you, my dear Ernest? What brings you up to town?
Oh, pleasure. What else bring one anywhere? Eating as usual, I see, aren't you?
I believe it is customary in good society to take some slight refreshment at 5 o'clock. Where have you been since last Thursday?
In the country.
What on earth do you do there?
When one is in town, one amuses oneself. When one is in the country, one amuses other people. It is excessively boring.
And who are these people you amuse?
Oh, neighbours.
Got nice neighbours in your part of Shropshire.
Perfectly horrid. Never speak to one of them.
How immensely you must amuse them. Shropshire is your county, is it not?
Eh? Shropshire? Yes, of course. Hello. Why all these cups? Why cucumber sandwiches? Why such reckless extravagance in one so young? Who's coming to tea?
Oh, merely Aunt Augusta and Gwendolen.
Perfectly delightful.
Yes, that is all very well, but I'm afraid Aunt Augusta won't quite approve of your being here.
May I ask why?
My dear fellow, the way you flirt with Gwendolen is perfectly disgraceful. It is almost as bad as the way Gwendolen flirts with you.
I'm in love with Gwendolen. I've come to town expressly to propose to her.
I thought you'd come up for pleasure. I call that business.
How utterly unromantic you are.
I really don't see anything romantic in proposing. Why, it is very romantic to be in love, but there's nothing romantic about a definite proposal. Why, one may be accepted, one usually is, I believe, but then the excitement's all over. The very essence of romance is uncertainty. If I ever get married, well, I'll certainly try to forget the fact.
Don't doubt that, my dear Alfie. The divorce court was specially invented for people whose memories are so curiously constituted.
There's no use speculating on that subject, dear boy. Divorces are made in heaven. Please don't touch the cucumber sandwiches. They're ordered specially for Aunt Augusta.
But you've been eating them all this time.
That's quite a different matter. She's my aunt. Here, have some bread and butter. The bread and butter is for Gwendolen. Gwendolen is quite devoted to bread and butter.
Oh, and very good bread and butter it is too.
Well, my dear fellow, you need not eat it as if you're going to eat it all. You behave as if you're married to her already. You are not married to her already, and I don't think you'll ever be.
Why on earth do you say that?
Well, in the first place, girls never marry the men they flirt with. Girls don't think it's right.
That is nonsense.
It isn't. It's a great truth. It accounts for the extraordinary number of bachelors that one sees all over the place. In the second place, well, I don't give my consent.
Your consent?
Gwendolen is my first cousin, and before I allow you to marry her, you must clear up the whole question of Cecily.
Cecily? What on earth do you mean? What do you mean, Algie, by Cecily? I don't know anybody of the name of Cecily.
Bring me the cigarette case Mr. Worthing left in the smoking room the last time he dined here.
Yes, sir.
You say you found my cigarette case all this time? Well, I wish to goodness you'd let me know. I've been writing frantic letters to Scotland Yard about it. I've been only offering a large reward.
Well, I wish you would offer one. Haven't given me more than usually hard out.
There's no good in offering a reward now that the thing is found.
Well, I think that is rather mean of you, Ernest, I must say. However, it makes no matter, for now that I look at the inscription inside, I find that this thing isn't yours at all.
Of course it's not. You've seen it with me 100 times, and you have no right whatsoever to read what is written inside. It's a very ungentlemanly thing to read a private cigarette case.
Oh, it is absurd to have a hard and fast rule about what one should read and what one shouldn't. More than half of modern culture depends on what one shouldn't read.
I'm quite aware of the fact, and I don't propose to discuss modern culture. It isn't the sort of thing one should talk of in private. I simply want my cigarette case back.
Yes, but this isn't your cigarette case. This cigarette case is a present from someone of the name of Cecily, and you said you didn't know anyone of that name.
Well, if you want to know, Cecily happens to be my aunt.
Your aunt?
Yes, charming lady she is too, lives at Tunbridge Wells. Just give it back to me, aunt.
Yes, but why does she call herself Little Cecily if she is your aunt and lives at Tunbridge Wells? From Little Cecily with her fondest love.
My dear Algy, what on earth has done that? Some aunts are tall and some are not tall. That is surely a matter an aunt may be allowed to decide for herself. You seem to think every aunt should be exactly like your aunt. That is absurd. I'm saying, just give it back to me, Auntie.
Yes, but why does your aunt call you her uncle? From little Aunt Cecily, with her fondest love to dear Uncle Jack. There's no objection, I admit, in an aunt being a small aunt, but why an aunt, no matter what her size may be, should call her own nephew her uncle, I can't quite make out. Besides, your name isn't Jack at all. It's Ernest.
It isn't Ernest. It's Jack.
You've always told me it was Ernest. I've introduced you to everyone as Ernest. You answer to the name of Ernest. You look as if your name was Ernest. You are the most earnest-looking person I ever saw in my life. It is perfectly absurd your saying that your name isn't Ernest. It's on your cards. Here's one of them. Mr. Ernest Worthing, B4, the Albany. I'll keep this as proof that your name is Ernest if you ever attempt to deny it to me, or to Gwendolyn, or to anyone else.
Well, my name is Ernest in town and Jack in the country. The cigarette case was given to me in the country.
Yes, but that does not account for the fact that your small Aunt Cecily, who lives at Tunbridge Wells, calls you her dear uncle. Come on, old boy, you'd much better have the thing out at once. I may mention that I've always suspected you of being a confirmed and secret Bunburyist, and I'm quite sure of it now.
Bunburyist? What on earth do you mean by Bunburyist?
I'll reveal to you the meaning of that incomparable expression as soon as you're kind enough to inform me why you are Ernest in town and Jack in the country.
Well, produce my cigarette case first.
Here it is. Now produce your explanation and pray make it improbable.
My dear Algy, there's nothing improbable at all about my explanation. In fact, it's perfectly ordinary. Old Mr. Thomas Cardew, who adopted me when I was a little boy, left me in his will guardian to his granddaughter, Miss Cecily Cardew. Cecily, who addresses me as uncle for motives of respect that you cannot possibly appreciate, lives at my place in the country under the charge of our admirable governess, Miss Prism.
And where is that place in the country, by the way?
There's nothing to you, dear boy. You're not going to be invited. I'll tell you quite candidly, the place is not in Shropshire.
I suspected that, my dear fellow. I've bumbried all over Shropshire on 2 separate occasions. Now go on. Why are you Ernest in town and Jack in the country?
My dear Algy, I don't know whether you'll be able to understand my real motives. You're hardly serious enough. When one is placed in the position of guardian, one must adopt a very high moral tone on all subjects. One is duty to do so. Since a high moral tone can hardly be said to conduce very much to either one's health or one's happiness, in order to get up to town, I've always pretended to have a younger brother by the name of Ernest, who lives in Albany and gets into the most terrible scrapes. That, my dear Algy, is the whole truth, pure and simple.
The truth is rarely pure and never simple. Modern life would be very tedious if it were either, and modern literature a complete impossibility.
That wouldn't be at all a bad thing.
Literary criticism is not your forte, my dear fellow. Don't try it. You should leave that to people who haven't been at a university. They do it so well in the daily papers. What you really are is a bumberist. I was quite right in saying you're a bumberist. You are one of the most advanced bumberists I know.
What on earth do you mean?
You have invented a very useful younger brother called Ernest, in order that you may be able to come up to town as often as you like. I've invented a perfectly invaluable invalid called Bunbury, in order that I may be able to go down into the country whenever I choose. Bunbury is perfectly invaluable. If it wasn't for Bunbury's extraordinary bad health, for instance, well, I wouldn't be able to dine with you tonight at Wilson's, for I've really been engaged to Aunt Augusta for more than a week.
I haven't asked you to dine with me anywhere tonight.
I know, you're absurdly careless. Nothing annoys people so much as not receiving invitations.
You'd much better dine with your Aunt Augusta.
I haven't got the smallest intention of doing anything of the kind. In the first place, I dine there on Monday, and once a week is quite enough to dine with one's own relations. In the second place, I know perfectly well who she'll place me next to tonight. She'll place me next to Mary Farquhar, who always flirts with her own husband across the dinner table. It's not very pleasant. Indeed, it is not even decent. It is simply washing one's clean linen in public. Besides, now I know you to be a bumberist, I naturally want to talk to you about bumbering. I want to tell you the rules.
I'm not a bunburyist at all. Gwendolyn accepts me, I'm going to kill my brother. Indeed, I think I'll kill him in any case. Cecily's a little much interested in him. She's rather a bore. So I'm going to get rid of Ernest. And I strongly advise you to do the same with with your invalid friend who has an absurd name.
Nothing will induce me to part with Bunbury. If you ever get married, which seems to me to be extremely problematic, you'll be very glad to know a Bunbury. A man who marries without knowing Bunbury has a very tedious time of it.
That is nonsense. If I marry a charming girl like Gwendolyn, she's the only girl I ever saw in my life that I would marry. I certainly wouldn't want to know Bunbury.
Then your wife will. You don't seem to realize that in married life, three's company, well, two's none.
Good heavens, don't try to be cynical. It's perfectly easy to be cynical.
It isn't easy to be anything nowadays. There's such a lot of beastly competition about. Ah, that must be Uncle Buster. Only relatives or bailiffs ever ring in that Wagnerian manner. Now, if I can get her out of the way for 10 minutes, so that you can have an opportunity for proposing to Gwendolyn, may I dine with you tonight at Wilson?
I suppose so, if you want to.
Yes, but you must be serious about it. I hate people who are not serious about meals. It is so shallow of them.
Lady Bracknell, Miss Fairfax.
Good afternoon, dear Arran. I hope you're behaving very well.
Well, I'm certainly feeling very well, Aunt Augusta.
That's not quite the same thing. In fact, the two things rarely go together.
Dear me, you are smart.
I'm always smart. Am I not, Mr. Worthing?
You're quite perfect, Miss Fairfax.
I hope I'm not that. It will leave no room for development. And I intend to develop in many directions.
I am sorry if we're a little late, Algernon, but I was obliged to call on dear Lady Harbury. I hadn't been there since her poor husband's death. I never saw a woman quite so altered. She was quite 20 years younger. And now, a cup of tea and one of those nice and calm sandwiches you promised me.
Certainly, Aunt Augusta.
Won't you come and sit here, Gwendolyn?
Thank you, Mama. I'm quite comfortable where I am.
Lane, why are there no cucumber sandwiches?
There were no cucumbers in the park this morning, sir. I went down twice.
No cucumbers?
No, sir. Not even for ready money.
Aunt Augusta, I'm greatly distressed about there being no cucumbers. Not even for ready money.
It really makes no matter, Algernon. I had some comfort in Lady Harbury, who seems to me to be living entirely for pleasure now.
I hear her hair has turned quite gold from grief.
It certainly has changed its colour, from what cause I, of course, cannot say. Thank you. I've quite a treat for you tonight, Algernon. I'm going to sit you down with Mary Farquhar. She's such a nice woman, and so attentive to her husband. It's delightful to watch them.
I'm afraid I shall have to give up the pleasure of dining with you tonight after all, Aunt Augusta.
I hope not. It would put my table completely out. Your uncle would have to dine upstairs. Fortunately, he is accustomed to that.
It is a great bore, and I need hardly say a terrible disappointment to me. But the fact is, I've just had a telegram from my poor friend Bunbury, saying that he is very ill again. They seem to think that I should be with him.
It is very strange. This Mr. Bunbury seems to suffer from curiously bad health.
Yes, poor Bunbury is a dreadful invalid.
Well, I think it's high time that Mr. Bunbury decided whether he was going to live or to die. This shilly-shallying of the profession is absurd. Nor do I in any way approve this modern sympathy with invalids. I consider it morbid. Illness of any kind is hardly a thing to be encouraged in others. Health is the primary duty of life. I'm always telling that to your poor uncle, but he never seems to take much notice, as far as any improvement in his ailment goes. I'd be much obliged if you would ask Mr. Bunbury, from me, to be kind enough not to have a relapse on Saturday, for I rely on you to arrange my music for me.
I'll speak to Bunbury, Aunt Augusta, if he is still conscious, and I think I can promise you he'll be all right by Saturday. Of course, the music is a great difficulty. You see, if one plays good music, people don't listen, and if one plays bad music, people don't talk. But I'll run over the program I've drawn out, if you're kind enough to join me in the next room for a moment.
Thank you, Algernon. It is very thoughtful of you. I'm sure the prayer will be quite delightful, and for a few expurgations. Gwendolyn, you will accompany me.
Certainly, Mamma.
Charming day it has been, Miss Fairfax.
Pray don't talk to me about the weather, Mr. Worthing. Whenever people talk to me about the weather, I always feel quite certain that they mean something else. And that makes me so nervous.
I do mean something else.
I thought so. In fact, I'm never wrong.
And I would like to be allowed to take advantage of Lady Bracknell's temporary absence to...
But I would certainly advise you to do so. Mamma has a way of coming back suddenly into a room that I've often had to speak to her about.
Miss Fairfax, ever since I met you, I've admired you more than any girl that I've ever met since I met you.
Yes, I'm quite well aware of the fact. And I've often wished in public, at any rate, you've been more demonstrative. To me, you've always had an irresistible fascination. Even before I met you, I was far from indifferent to you. We live, as I hope you know, Mr. Worthing, in an age of ideals. The fact is constantly mentioned in the more expensive monthly magazines, and has reached the provincial pulpits, I'm told. And my ideal has always been to love someone with the name of Ernest. There is something in that name that inspires absolute confidence. The moment Algernon first mentioned to me I had a friend called Ernest, I knew I was destined to love you.
You really love me, Gwendolyn.
Passionately.
Oh, darling, I don't know how happy you've made me.
My own Ernest.
But you don't really mean to say that you couldn't love me if my name wasn't Ernest.
But your name is Ernest.
Well, yes, I know it is, but supposing it was something else. Do you mean to say you couldn't love me then?
That is clearly a metaphysical speculation. And like most metaphysical speculations, there's very little reference at all to the actual facts of real life as we know them.
Personally, darling, to speak quite candidly, I don't much care about the name of Ernest. I don't think the name suits me at all.
It suits you perfectly. It's a divine name. It has a music of its own. It produces vibrations.
Well, really, Gwendolyn, I say it, I think there are lots of other, much nicer names. I think, Jack, for instance. Charming name.
Jack? There is very little music in the name Jack. Very little indeed.
It does not thrill. It produces absolutely no vibrations. I've known several Jacks, and they all, without question, were more than usually plain. Besides, Jack is a notorious domesticity for John. And I pity anyone who is married to a man called John. He would probably never be allowed to know the entrancing pleasures of a single moment's solitude.
must get married at once. There's no time to be lost.
Married, Mr. Worthing?
Well, surely. You know that I love you. You led me to believe, Miss Fairfax, that you are not absolutely indifferent to me.
I adore you. But you haven't proposed to me yet. Nothing has been said at all about marriage. The subject has not even been touched on.
Well, may I propose now?
I think it would be an admirable opportunity. And to spare you any possible disappointment, Mr. Worthing, I think it's only fair to tell you quite frankly beforehand that I'm fully determined to accept you. Yes, Mr. Worthing. What have you to say to me?
You know what I've got to say to you.
Yes, but you don't say it.
Gwendolyn, will you marry me?
Of course I will, darling. I've not even been about it. I'm afraid you have very little experience in how to propose.
I ain't one. I've never loved anyone in the world but you.
Yes, but men often propose for practice. I know my own brother Gerald does. All my girlfriends tell me so. Oh, Ernest, what wonderfully blue eyes you have. Oh, quite blue. I hope you will always look at me just like that, especially when there are others present.
Mr. Worthing! Rise, sir, from that semi-recumbent posture. It is most indecorous.
Mamma, I must beg you to retire. This is no place for you. Besides, Mr. Worthing is not quite finished yet.
Finished what, may I ask?
I'm engaged to Mr. Worthing, Mamma.
Pardon me, you're not engaged to anyone. When you do become engaged, I, or your father, should as help permit him, will inform you of the fact. An engagement should come on a young girl's surprise, pleasant or unpleasant, as the case may be. It is hardly a matter that she could be allowed to arrange for herself. And now, I have a few questions to put to you, Mr. Worthing. While I'm making these inquiries, you, Gwendolyn, will wait for me below in the carriage.
Mamma!
In the carriage, Gwendolyn! Gwendolyn, the carriage!
Yes, Mamma.
You may take your seat, Mr. Worthing.
Thank you, Lady Bracknell. I prefer standing.
I feel bound to tell you that you're not down on my list of eligible young men. Although I have the same list as the dear Duchess of Floaton has. We went together, in fact. However, I'm quite ready to enter your name should your answer be what a truly affectionate mother requires. Do you smoke?
Well, yes, I must admit I smoke.
I'm glad to hear it. A man should always have an occupation of some kind. There are far too many idle men in London as it is. How old are you?
29.
A very good age to be married at. I have always been of the opinion that a man who desires to get married should know either everything or nothing. Which do you know?
I know nothing, Lady Bracknell.
I'm pleased to hear it. I do not approve of anything that tampers with natural ignorance. Ignorance is like a delicate exotic fruit. Touch it, and the bloom is gone. This whole theory of modern education is radically unsound. Fortunately, in England at any rate, it produces no effect whatsoever. If it did, it would probably lead to acts of violence in Grosvenor Square. What is your income?
Between 7,000 and 8,000 a year.
In land or in investments?
In investments, chiefly.
That is satisfactory.
I have a country house, of course, with some land attached to it. About 1,500 acres, I believe. But I don't rely on that for my real income. In fact, as far as I can make out, poachers are the only people who make anything out of it.
A country house? How many bedrooms? Well, that matter can be cleared up afterwards. You have a townhouse, I hope. A girl with a simple, unspoilt nature, like Gwendolyn, could hardly be expected to reside in the country.
Well, I own a house in Belgrave Square, which is let by the year to Lady Bloxham. I can get it back, of course, whenever I like at 6 months' notice.
Lady Bloxham? I don't know her.
Oh, she goes about very little. She's a lady considerably advanced in years.
Ah, nowadays that is no guarantee of respectability of character. What number in Belgrave Square?
149.
The unfashionable side. I thought there was something. However, that could be easily altered.
Do you mean the fashion on the side?
Both, if necessary, I presume, Mr. Worthing. What are your politics?
Well, I'm afraid I really have none. I'm a liberal unionist.
Oh, they count as Tories. Now, to minor matters. Are your parents living?
I've lost both my parents.
To lose one parent, Mr. Worthing, mere regards misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness. Who was your father? He was evidently a man of some wealth.
I'm afraid I really don't know. Fact is, I said I'd lost both my parents. It would be nearer the truth to say my parents seem to have lost me. I don't actually know who I am by birth. I was found.
Found?
The old Mr. Thomas Cardew, an old gentleman of a very kindly and charitable disposition, found me and gave me the name of Worthing because, well, he happened to have a first-class ticket for Worthing in his pocket. Worthing is a place in Sussex. It's a seaside resort.
Where did this charitable gentleman with this first-class ticket for this seaside resort find you?
In a handbag.
A handbag?
Yes, Lady Bracknell, I was in a handbag. A rather large black leather handbag with handles to it. An ordinary handbag, in fact.
In what locality did Mr. James or Thomas Cardew come across this ordinary handbag?
In the cloakroom at Victoria Station. It was given to him in mistake for his own.
Cloakroom at Victoria Station?
Yes, the Brighton line.
The line is immaterial. Mr. Worthing, I confess I feel somewhat bewildered by what you've just told me. To be born, or at any rate bred, in a handbag, whether it's handles or not, seems to me to display contempt for the ordinary decencies of family life, which reminds one of the worst excesses of the French Revolution. And I presume you know what that unfortunate movement led to. As to the particular locality of the handbag, a cloakroom at a railway station might serve to hide a social indiscretion. Has indeed been used for that purpose before now, but it could hardly be regarded on a sure basis for a recognized position in good society.
Well, may I ask you then what you would advise me to do? And he'd hardly say I would do anything in the world to ensure Gwendolyn's happiness.
I would strongly advise you, Mr. Worthing, to acquire some relations as soon as possible, and to make a definite effort to produce at any rate one parent of either sex before the season is quite over.
I don't say how I could possibly manage to do that. I could produce the handbag at any moment. It's in my dressing room, too. I really think I should satisfy you, Lady Bracknell.
Me, sir? What's to do with me? You can hardly imagine that I, or Lord Bracknell, would allow our only daughter, a girl brought up with the utmost care, to marry in a cloakroom and form a line to the parcel. Good afternoon, Mr. Worthing.
Good afternoon. Idiotic you are.
Didn't it go off all right, old boy? Oh, you don't mean to say Gwendolen refused you? Oh, I know, it is a way she has. She is always refusing people. I think it is most ill-natured of her.
Oh, Gwendolen is as right as a trivet. As far as she's concerned, we're engaged. Her mother is perfectly unbearable. Who met such a gorgon? I don't actually know what a gorgon is like, but I'm sure that Lady Bracknell is one. In any case, she's a monster. I've been a myth, which is rather unfair. I beg your pardon, Algy. Suppose I shouldn't talk of your own aunt in that way before you.
My dear boy, I love hearing my relations abused. It is the only thing that makes me put up with them at all. Relations are simply a tedious pack of people who haven't got the remotest knowledge of how to live, nor the smallest instinct about when to die.
It isn't. You won't argue about the matter. You always want to argue about things.
That is what things were originally made for.
Upon my word, if I thought that, I'd shoot myself. You don't think there's any chance of Gwendolyn becoming like her mother in about 150 years?
All women become like their mothers. That's their tragedy. No man does, that's his.
Is that clever?
It's perfectly phrased, and quite as true as any observation in civilized life should be.
Sick to death of cleverness. Everybody's clever nowadays. You can't go anywhere without meeting clever people. The thing has become an absolute public nuisance. I wish to goodness we had a few fools left.
We have.
I should extremely like to meet them. What do they talk about?
The fools? What about the clever people, of course?
What fools?
By the way, Did you tell Gwendolen the truth about your being Ernest in town and Jack in the country?
My dear fellow, the truth isn't the sort of thing one tells a nice, sweet, refined girl. What extraordinary ideas you have about the ways to behave to a woman.
The only way to behave to a woman is to make love to her if she is pretty, and to someone else if she is plain.
This is nonsense.
What about your brother? What about the profligate Ernest?
Look, by the end of the week, I shall have got rid of him. I say he died in Paris of apoplexy. Lots of people die from something like apoplexy, don't they?
Yes, but it's the sort of thing that runs in families. You'd much better say a severe chill.
You sure severe chill isn't hereditary or anything of the kind?
Of course it isn't.
Very well then. My poor brother Ernest will be carried off suddenly in Paris by severe chill. That gets rid of him.
But didn't you say Miss Cardew was a little too much interested in your poor brother Ernest? Won't she feel his loss a good deal?
Oh, that's all right. Cecily isn't a silly romantic girl, I'm glad to say. She has a capital appetite, goes on long walks, and pays no attention at all to her lessons.
I would rather like to see Cecily.
I will take very good care that you never do. She's excessively pretty. She's only just 18.
Have you told Gwendolen yet that you have an excessively pretty ward who's only just 18?
One doesn't blurt these things out to people. Gwendolen and Cecily are perfectly certain to be extremely great friends. I'll bet you anything you like. Half an hour after they've met, they'll be calling each other sister.
Women only do that when they've called each other a lot of other things first. Now, my dear boy, if we want to get a good table at Willis's, we really must go and dress. Do you know it's nearly 7?
Oh, it's always nearly 7.
Well, I'm hungry.
I never knew you when you weren't.
Miss Fairfax.
Gwendolen! Upon my word.
Algy, kindly turn your back. I have something very particular to say to Mr. Worthing.
Really, Gwendolen, I don't think I can allow this at all.
Algy, you always adopt such a strictly immoral attitude towards life. You are not quite old enough to do that. Ernest, we may never be married. From the expression of Mamma's face, I fear we never shall. Few parents nowadays pay any regard to what their children say to them. The old-fashioned respect for the young is fast dying out. But although Mamma may prevent us from being man and wife, and I may marry someone else, and marry often, nothing she can possibly do can ever alter my eternal devotion to you.
My own one.
The story of your romantic origin, as related to me by Mamma with unpleasing comments, has naturally stirred the deeper fibers of my nature. The simplicity of your character makes you exquisitely comprehensible to me. Your address at the Albany I have. What is your address in the country?
The Manor House. Walton, Hertfordshire.
There's a good postal service, I suppose. It may be necessary to do something desperate. That, of course, will require some serious consideration. I'll communicate with you daily.
I am one.
How long do you remain in town?
Till Monday.
Oh, good. Algy, you may turn around now.
Thanks, I've turned around already.
You may also ring the bell.
Let me see you to your carriage, my own one.
Of course.
I'll see Miss Fairfax out.
Yes.
A glass of sherry, Lane.
Yes.
Tomorrow, Lane, I'm going Bunburying.
Yes.
I probably shan't be back till Monday. You can put up all my dress shirts, my smoking jacket, all the Bunbury suits.
Of course.
I hope tomorrow will be a fine day, Lane.
It never is, sir.
Lane, you are a perfect pessimist.
I do my best to give satisfaction, sir.
Now there's a sensible, intellectual girl. The only girl I've ever cared for in my life. What on earth are you so amused at?
I'm just a little anxious about poor Bunbury, that's all.
If you don't take care, your friend Bunbury will get you into a serious scrape someday.
I love scrapes. They're the only things that are never serious.
That is nonsense, Algy. You never talk anything but nonsense.
Nobody ever does.
gathering of flowers is rather Malta's duty than yours, especially at the moment when intellectual pleasures await you. Your German grammar is on the table. Pray open it at page 15. We will repeat yesterday's lesson.
I don't like German. It isn't at all a becoming language. I know perfectly well that I look quite plain after my German lesson.
Child, you know how anxious your guardian is that you should improve yourself in every way. He laid particular stress on your German as he was leaving for town the other day. Indeed, he always lays particular stress on your German when he is leaving for town.
Uncle Jack always looks so serious when we three are together. Sometimes I think he is so serious he cannot be quite well.
Your guardian enjoys the best of health, and his gravity of demeanour is to be especially commended in one so comparatively young as he is. I know no one with a higher sense of duty and responsibility.
I suppose that is often why he looks a little bored when we three are together.
Cecily, I am surprised at you. Mr. Worthing has many troubles in his life. Idle merriment and triviality would be out of place in his conversation. You must not forget his constant anxiety about that unfortunate young man, his brother.
I wish Uncle Jack would allow that unfortunate young man, his brother, to come down here sometime. We might have a good influence over him, Miss Prism. I'm certainly sure you would. You know, geology and German and things of that kind influence a man very much.
Well, I'm not sure that even I could produce any effect on a character that, according to his own brother's admission, is irretrievably weak and vacillating. Indeed, I'm not sure I would desire to acclaim him. I'm not in favour of this modern mania of turning bad people into good people at a moment's notice. As a man sows, so let him reap. We must between your diary, Cecily. I really don't see why you should have a diary at all.
I keep a diary in order to enter all the wonderful secrets of my life. If I didn't write them down, I should probably forget all about them.
Memory, my dear Cecily, is the diary we all carry about with us.
Yes, but memory usually chronicles the things that haven't happened, and couldn't possibly have happened. I believe memory is responsible for nearly all the 3-volume novels the library sends us.
Do not speak lightly of the 3-volume novel, Cecily. I wrote one myself in earlier days.
Did you really, Miss Prism? How wonderfully clever you are. I hope it did not end happily. I hate novels that end happily. They depress me so much.
The good end of happily, the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means.
I suppose so. But it seems rather unfair. And was your novel ever published?
Alas, no. The manuscript, unfortunately, was abandoned. I use the word in the sense of lost or mislaid. To your work, child, these speculations are profitless.
Fancy dear Dr. Chasble's coming up through the garden.
Dr. Chasuble, this is indeed a pleasure.
And how are we this morning, Miss Prism? You are, I trust, well?
Oh, Miss Prism has just been complaining of a slight headache. I think it would do her much good to have a short stroll in the park with you, Dr. Chasble.
I have not said anything about the headache, Cecily.
I know, dear Miss Prism, but I felt instinctively that you had a headache. Indeed, I was thinking about that and not about my German lesson when the rector came in.
I hope, Cecily, that you're not being inattentive.
Oh, I'm afraid I am.
That's strange. Were I fortunate enough to be Miss Prism's pupil, I would hang upon her lips. I spoke metaphorically, of course. My metaphor drawn from the bees. But I must not disturb Egeria and her pupil any longer.
Egeria? My name is Letitia, Doctor.
A classical allusion merely, drawn from the pagan authors. I trust I will see you both at evensong.
I think I will have a stroll with you after all, Doctor. I find I have a headache and a walk might do it good.
With pleasure, Miss Prism, with pleasure. I soon go as far as the schools and back.
Well, that would be delightful. Cecily, you will read a political economy in my absence. The chapter on the fall of the rupee you may omit. It is somewhat too sensational. Even these metallic problems have their melodramatic side.
Horrid political economy, horrid geography, and horrid German.
Mr. Ernest Worthing has just driven over from the station. He's brought his luggage with him.
Mr. Ernest Worthing before the Albany, Uncle Jack's brother. Did you tell him Uncle Jack was in town?
Yes, miss. He seemed very much disappointed. I told him you and Miss Prism in the garden. He said he was anxious to speak to you privately for a moment.
Ask Mr. Ernest Worthing to come here. I suppose we'd better talk to the housekeeper for a room for him.
Yes, miss.
I've never met a really wicked person before. I'm rather frightened he'll be just like everyone else. He is.
You're my little cousin Cecily, I'm sure.
Your Ernest, I'm ashamed to say. I'm not little. In fact, I believe I'm more than usually tall.
really wicked at all, Cousin Cecily. You mustn't think that I'm wicked.
Then you've certainly been deceiving us all in a very inexcusable manner. I hope you have not been leading a double life, pretending to be wicked but really being good all the time. That would be hypocrisy.
Well, of course, I've been rather reckless.
I'm glad to hear it.
In fact, now you mention the subject, I've been very bad in my own small way.
I don't think you should be so proud of that, although I'm sure it's very pleasant.
Well, it is much pleasanter being here with you.
I can't understand how you were here at all. Uncle Jack will be back to Monday afternoon.
That is a great disappointment. I'm obliged to go up by the first train on Monday morning. I have a business appointment I'm anxious to miss.
Couldn't you miss it anywhere but in London?
No, the appointment's in London.
Well, of course, I understand how important it is not to keep a business engagement if one wants to retain any sense of the beauty of life. But I still think you ought to wait until Uncle Jack gets back. I know he wants to speak to you about your emigrating.
About my what?
Your emigrating? He's gone up to buy your outfit.
Why, I certainly won't let Jack buy my outfit. He's absolutely no taste in neckties at all.
I don't think you'll require neckties. He's sending you to Australia.
Australia? What, sooner die?
Well, he said it in on Wednesday night that you would have to choose between this world, the next world, and Australia.
Oh, well. The accounts I've received of this world and Australia are not particularly encouraging. This world is good enough for me, Cousin Cecily.
Yes, but are you good enough for it?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not that. That is why I want you to reform me. You might make it your mission, Cousin Cecily, if you don't mind.
I'm afraid I have no time this afternoon.
Well, would you mind me reforming myself this afternoon?
That's rather quixotic of you, but I think you should try.
I will. I feel better already.
You're looking a little worse.
Well, that is because I'm hungry.
I've thought of something. I forgot that if one is going to lead an entirely new life, one requires regular and wholesome meals. Won't you come in?
Thank you. Might I have a buttonhole first? I never have any appetite unless I have a buttonhole first.
An orchid?
No, I'd sooner have a pink rose.
Oh. Why?
Because you are like a pink rose, Cousin Cecily.
I don't think it can be quite right for you to talk to me like that. Miss Prism never says such things to me.
Then Miss Prism is a short-sighted old lady. You are the prettiest girl I ever saw.
Miss Prism says all good looks are a snare.
They're a snare every sensible man would like to be caught.
I don't think I'd like to catch a sensible man. I wouldn't know what to talk to him about.
Cecily! Cecily, wait!
You're far too much alone, dear Dr. Chaswell. You should get married. Misanthrope, I can understand. A womanthrope, never.
Believe me, the precept, as well as the practice of the primitive church, was distinctly against matrimony.
Well, that is obviously the reason why the primitive church has not lasted until the present day. And you do not seem to realize, dear doctor, that by persistently remaining single, a man converts himself into a permanent, public temptation. Men should be more careful. This very celibacy has led weaker vessels astray.
But is a man not equally attractive when married?
No married man is ever attractive except to his wife.
And often, I have been told, not even to her.
That depends on the intellectual sympathies of the woman. Maturity can be depended upon. Ripeness can be trusted. Young women are green. I spoke horticulturally. My metaphor was drawn from fruits. But where is Cecily?
Perhaps you followed us to the schools.
Mr. Worthing.
Mr. Worthing?
This is indeed a surprise. We did not look for you until Monday afternoon.
I have returned sooner than I expected. Dr. Chashwell, I hope you're all well.
Mr. Worthing, I hope this garb of woe does not betoken some terrible calamity.
My brother.
More shameful debts and extravagance?
Still leading his life of pleasure.
Dead.
Your brother, Ernest, dead?
Quite dead.
What a lesson for him. I trust he will profit by it.
Mr. Worthing, I offer you my sincere condolences. At least you have the consolation of knowing that you are the most forgiving and most generous of brothers.
Oh, poor Ernest. He had many faults, but it is a sad, sad blow.
Very sad indeed. Were you with him at the end?
No, he died abroad. In Paris, in fact. I received a telegram last night from the manager of the Grand Hotel.
Was the cause of death mentioned?
A severe chill, it seems.
As a man sows, so shall he reap.
Charity, Miss Prism, charity. I myself am not perfect. I am susceptible to drafts. Will the interment take place here?
No, he seems to have expressed a desire to be buried in Paris.
In Paris? That hardly sticks to any serious mind in the past. You would no doubt wish me to make some slight allusion to this tragic domestic affliction next Sunday. My sermon on the meaning and the manner in the wilderness can be adapted to any occasion, joyful, or as in the present case, distressing. I have preached it at harvest celebrations, christenings, days of humiliation.
That reminds me. You mentioned christenings, I think, Dr. Churchill. I suppose you know how to christen all right? I mean, you're continually christening, aren't you?
It is, I regret to say, one of the rector's most constant duties in the parish. I have often talked to the poorer classes on the subject, but they don't seem to know what thrift is.
Mr. Worthing, is there any particular infant in whom you are interested in christening?
My brother was unmarried.
People who live entirely for pleasure usually are.
This is not for any child, dear Doctor. I'm very fond of children. No, the fact is, I would like to be christened myself. This afternoon, if you have nothing better to do.
But surely, Mr. Worthing, you have been christened already.
I don't remember anything about it.
Have you had any great doubts on the subject?
Well, I certainly intend to have. Although, I don't know whether the thing would bother you in any way if you think I'm a little too old now.
Not at all. The immersion and sprinkling of adults has a perfectly normal nature and practice.
Immersion?
You need not have any apprehensions. Sprinkling that is all that is necessary, and I think quite advisable. Our weather seems to be so changeable. At which hour do you wish the ceremony to be performed?
Oh, I might trot around about 5 if it will suit you.
Perfectly, perfectly. I have 2 similar ceremonies to perform at that hour. A case of twins and outlying cottages on your estate. Poor Jenkins, a most hard-working man.
I don't see much fun in being christened along with other babies. To be childish. Half past 5.
Admirably, admirably. But I must not enter or disturb a house of sorrow. I merely beg you not to be bowed down by grief, as bitter trials are often blessings in disguise.
And this seems to me to be a blessing of an extremely obvious kind.
Uncle Jack! Oh, I am glad to see you. What horrid clothes you have on. Do go and change them.
Cecily!
My child,
Uncle Jack, do look happy. You look as though you have a toothache, and I've such a surprise for you. Who do you think is in the dining room? Your brother!
Who?
Your brother Ernest. He arrived half an hour ago.
What nonsense. I haven't got a brother.
However badly he may have treated you in the past, you won't be so heartless as to disown him. I'll tell him to come out, and you will shake hands with him, won't you, Uncle Jack?
These are joyful tidings.
Well, after we had all resigned to this loss, his sudden return seems to me particularly distressing.
My brother is in the dining room. I don't know what it all means. I think it's perfectly absurd. Good heavens.
Brother John, I've come down from town to tell you that I'm terribly sorry for all the trouble I've given you, and that I intend to lead a better life in the future.
You're not going to refuse your own brother's hand, are you, Uncle Jack?
Nothing will induce me to take his hand. I think his coming down here is disgraceful. He knows perfectly well why.
Jack, do be nice. There is some good in everyone. Ernest has just been telling me about his poor invalid friend, Mr. Bunbury. He goes to visit so often. Surely there must be some good in a man who leaves the pleasures of London to sit by a bed of pain.
Oh, he's been talking about Bunbury, has he?
Yes, Ernest told me all about poor Mr. Bunbury and his terrible state of health.
Bunbury. Well, I won't have him talk to you about Bunbury or about anything else. It's enough to drive one perfectly frantic.
Of course, I admit the faults are all on my side, but I must say I think Brother John's coldness to me is peculiarly painful. I expected a more enthusiastic welcome, especially considering this is the first time I've come here.
Uncle Jack, if you don't shake hands with Ernest, I will never forgive you.
Never forgive you.
Never, never, never.
Well, this is the last time I shall ever do it.
It is perfect, is it not? To see such a perfect reconciliation. I think we should leave the two brothers together.
Yes, Cecily, you'll come with us.
Certainly. My little task of reconciliation is over.
You have done a beautiful task today, dear child.
We must not be premature in our judgments.
I feel very happy.
You young scoundrel, Alton. You must get out of this place as soon as possible. I don't like bunburying here.
I put Mr. Ernest's things in the room next door, sir. I suppose that's all right.
What?
Mr. Ernest's luggage, sir. I've unpacked it and put it in the room next to your own.
His luggage.
Yes, sir. 3 portmanteaus, a dressing case, 2 hat boxes, and a large luncheon basket.
I'm afraid I won't be able to stay more than a week this time.
Merriman ordered ducated once. Mr. Ernest has been suddenly called back to town.
Yes, sir.
What a fearful lie you are, Jack. You have not been called back to town at all.
Yes, you have.
Well, I didn't hear anyone call me.
Your duty as a gentleman calls you back.
My duty as a gentleman has never interfered with my pleasures in the smallest degree.
Yes, I can quite understand that.
Well, Cecily is a darling.
You are not to talk of Miss Cardew like that. I don't like it.
Well, I don't like your clothes. You look perfectly ridiculous in them. Why on earth don't you walk and change? It's perfectly childish to be in deep mourning for a man who is actually staying for a whole week in your house as a guest. I call it grotesque.
You're certainly not staying with me for a whole week as a guest or as anything else. You've got to leave by the 4:05 train.
I certainly won't leave you so long as you are in mourning. It's most unfriendly. If I were in mourning, you would stay with me, I suppose. I should think it most unkind if you didn't.
Well, will you go if I change my clothes?
Yes, if you're not too long about it. I never saw anybody take so long to dress and with such little result.
In any case, that's better than being always overdressed as you are.
If I'm occasionally a little overdressed, I make up for it by being always immensely overeducated.
Your fancy is ridiculous. Your conduct an outrage and your presence in my garden utterly absurd. However, you've got to catch the 4:05 and I hope you'll have a pleasant journey back to town. This bunburying, as you call it, has not been a great success for you.
I think it has been a great success. I'm in love with Cecily, and that is everything. Here she is.
Oh, I merely came back to water the roses. I thought you were with Uncle Jack.
He's gone to order the dog cart for me.
Oh, is he taking you for a nice drive?
He's going to send me away.
Well, they've got to part.
I'm afraid so. It is a very painful parting.
It is always painful to part from people whom one has known for such a brief space of time. The absence of old friends one can endure with equanimity. But even a momentary separation from anyone whom one has just been introduced is almost unbearable.
Thank you.
The dog cart is at the door, sir.
It can wait very little. 5 minutes?
Yes.
Cecily, I hope I shall not offend you if I state quite frankly and openly that you seem to me to be, in every way, the visible personification of absolute perfection.
I think your frankness does you great credit, Ernest. If you allow me, I'll copy your remarks down into my diary.
Do you really keep a diary, Cecily? I'd give anything to look at it, may I?
Oh no. It is simply a very young girl's record of her own thoughts and impressions, and subsequently meant for publication. When it appears in volume form, I hope you'll order a copy. But pray, Ernest, don't stop. I delight in taking down for dictation. I have reached absolute perfection. You can go on. I'm quite ready for more. I don't cough, Ernest. When one is dictating, one should speak fluently and not cough. Besides, I don't know how to spell a cough.
Cecily, ever since I first looked upon your wonderful and incomparable beauty, I've dared to love you wildly, passionately, devotedly. Hopelessly.
I don't think you should say that you love me wildly, passionately, devotedly, hopelessly. Hopelessly doesn't seem to make much sense, does it?
Cecily.
The dog cart is waiting, sir.
Tell it to come round next week at the same hour.
Yes, sir.
Uncle Jack would be very much annoyed if you knew you were staying on till next week at the same hour.
Oh, I don't care about Jack. I don't care for anybody in the whole world except you. I love you, Cecily. You will marry me, won't you?
Of course. You silly boy. Why, we've been engaged for the past 3 months.
For the past 3 months.
Yes, it will be exactly 3 months on Thursday.
But how did we become engaged?
Well, ever since dear Uncle Jack first confessed to us he had a younger brother, who was very wicked and bad, you, of course, have formed the chief topic of conversation between myself and Miss Prison. And a man who is much talked about is often very attractive. I dare say it was foolish of me, but I fell in love with you, Ernest.
Darling. But when was the engagement actually settled?
On the 14th of February last, worn out by your entire ignorance of my existence, I determined to end the matter once and for all. But after a long struggle with myself, I accepted you under this dear old tree here. The next day, I bought this little ring in your name, and this bracelet, with a true lover's knot I promised you always to wear.
Did I give you this? That's very pretty, isn't it?
Yes, you've wonderfully good taste, Ernest. It's often the excuse I've given you for leading such a bad life. And this is the box, in which I keep all your dear letters.
My letters? But my own sweet Cecily, I've never written you any letters.
You need hardly remind me of that, Ernest. I remember only too well I was forced to write your letters for you. I wrote yours 3 times a week, and sometimes oftener.
Oh, do let me read them, Cecily.
Oh, I couldn't possibly. They would make you far too conceited. The 3 you wrote me after I broke off the engagement are so beautiful, so badly spelled, that even now I can hardly read them without crying a little.
But was the engagement ever broken off?
Of course it was. On the 22nd of last March. You can read the installment if you like. Today I broke off my engagement with Ernest. I feel it is better to do so. The weather continues charming.
But why on earth did you break it off? What had I done? I've done nothing. Cecily, I'm very much hurt indeed to hear you broke it off. Particularly when the weather was so charming.
It would hardly have been a really serious engagement if I hadn't broken it off at least once. But I forgave you before the week was out.
Cecily, what a perfect angel you are.
You dear romantic boy. I hope your hair curls naturally. Does it?
Yes, darling. With a little help from others.
I'm so glad.
You'll never break off our engagement again, will you, Cecily?
I don't think I could now that I've actually met you. And of course, there is the question of your name.
Yes, of course.
You mustn't laugh at me, darling. But I've always had this girlish dream to love someone by the name of Ernest. There is something in that name that inspires absolute confidence. I pity any poor married woman whose husband is not called Ernest.
By my own dear child, do you mean to say you couldn't love me if I had some other name?
But what name?
Oh, any name you like. Algernon, for instance.
But I don't like Algernon.
My own dear, sweet, loving little darling, I really can't see why you should object to the name Algernon at all. It's not at all a bad name. In fact, it is a rather aristocratic name. Half of the chaps that get into bankruptcy court called Algernon. But seriously, Cecily, if my name was Algie, couldn't you love me?
I might respect you, Ernest. I might admire your character, but I fear I would not be able to give you my undivided attention.
Cecily, your rector here is, I suppose, thoroughly experienced in all the rites and ceremonials of the church.
Oh, yes. And Dr. Chadwick is a very learned man. He's never written a single book, so you can imagine how much he knows.
I must see him at once on a most important christening. I mean, our most important business. Well, I shan't be away more than half an hour.
Seeing that we have been engaged since February the 14th, and that I only met you today, it seems rather hard that you should leave me for so long a period as half an hour. Couldn't you make it 20 minutes?
I'll be back in no time.
What an impetuous boy he is. I like his hair so much. I must enter his proposal in my diary.
Miss Fairfax has just called to see Mr. Worthing on very important business, Miss Fairfax states.
Isn't Uncle Jack in the library?
Mr. Worthing went over in the direction of the rectory some time ago.
Ask the lady to come here. Uncle Jack is sure to be back soon. one of the good elderly women involved with Uncle Jack's philanthropic work in London. I don't like women who are involved with philanthropic work. It's so forward of them.
Miss Fairfax?
Can I allow me to introduce myself? My name is Cecily Cardew.
Cecily Cardew? What a sweet name. Something tells me we're going to be great friends. And like you already, more than I can say. My first impressions see people are never wrong.
How kind of you to like me so much, after we have known each other for such a comparatively short space of time. Won't you sit down?
I may call you Cecily, may I not?
Oh, with pleasure.
And you will always call me Gwendolyn, won't you?
If you wish.
Then it is all quite settled, is it not?
I hope so.
Perhaps this would be a favourable opportunity for my mentioning who I am. My father is Lord Bracknell. You've never heard of Papa, I suppose.
I don't think so.
I think that is quite as it should be. The home seems to me to be the proper sphere for a man. And certainly, once a man begins to neglect his domestic duties, he becomes painfully effeminate, does he not? And I don't like that. It makes men so very attractive. Cecily, Mamma, whose views on education are remarkably strict, has brought me out to be extremely short-sighted. It is part of her system. So do you mind my looking at you through my glasses?
Not at all. I'm very fond of being looked at.
You were here on a short visit, I suppose?
Oh no, I live here.
Really? Your mother, no doubt, or some female relative of advanced years resides here also.
No, I have no mother, nor in fact any relations.
Indeed.
I'm Mr. Worthing's ward.
Mr. Worthing never mentioned to me he had a ward. How secretive of him. It grows more interesting hourly. I'm not sure, however, that the news fills me with feelings of unmixed delight. I'm very fond of you, Cecily. I've liked you ever since I met you. But I feel bound to state that now I know you are Mr. Worthing's ward, I cannot help expressing a wish that you were, well, just a little older than you seem to be, and not quite so very alluring in appearance. In fact, if I may speak quite candidly,
And pray do. I always think that if someone has something unpleasant to say, one should always be quite candid.
well, to speak with perfect candor, Cecily, I wish you were fully 42 and more than usually plain for your age. Ernest has a strong, upright nature. He is the very soul of truth and honour. Disloyalty would be as impossible to him as deception. But even men of the noblest possible moral character can be extremely susceptible to the influences of the physical charms of others. Modern, no less than ancient history supplies us with the most painful examples of what virtue. If it were not so, indeed, history would be quite unreadable.
I beg your pardon. But did you say Ernest?
Yes.
But it is not Mr. Ernest Worthing who is my guardian. It is his brother, his elder brother.
Ernest never mentioned to me he had a brother.
I'm afraid they have not been on good terms for some time.
That accounts for it. Now I think of it, I've never heard any man mention his brother. The subject seems most distasteful to them. Cecily, you're a bit of a low from my mind. I was growing almost anxious. How terrible it would have been if any cloud had come across a friendship like ours. Of course, you are quite sure that it is not Mr. Ernest Worthing who is your guardian.
Oh, yes, quite sure. In fact, I am going to be his.
I beg your pardon.
My dear Gwendolyn, there is no reason why I should make it a secret of you. Our little country newspaper is sure to chronicle the fact next week. Mr. Ernest Worthing and I are engaged to be married.
My darling Cecily, I think there must be some slight error. Mr. Ernest Worthing is engaged to me. The announcement will appear in the Morning Post on Saturday at the latest.
You appear to be under some misconception. Mr. Ernest Worthing proposed to me exactly 10 minutes ago.
It is certainly very curious, for he asked me to be his wife yesterday afternoon at 5:30. If you would care to verify the incident, pray do so. I never travel without my diary. One should always have something sensational to read on the train. I'm so sorry, dear Cecily, if it is any disappointment to you, but it would appear that I have the prior claim.
It would distress me more than I can tell you, dear Gwendolyn, to cause you any physical or mental anguish. But I feel bound to point out that since I was proposed to you, he has clearly changed his mind.
If the poor fellow has been entrapped into any foolish promises, I consider it my duty to rescue him at once, and with a firm hand.
Whatever entanglement my dear boy may have got into, I will never reproach him with it after we are married.
Do you allude to me, Miss Cardew, as an entanglement? You are presumptuous. On an
listen to our engagement. How dare you? Now is not the time to wear the shallow mask of manners. When I see a spade, I call it a spade.
Well, I'm glad to say that I have never seen a spade. It's obvious that our social spheres are widely different.
Shall we take as usual, miss?
Yes, as usual.
Are there many interesting walks in the vicinity, Miss Cardew?
Oh yes, a great many. From top of the one of the hills quite close to here, one can see 5 counties.
5 counties? I don't think I should like that. I hate crowds.
Suppose that is why you live in the town.
Quite a well-kept garden this is, Miss Cardew.
So glad you like it, Miss Fairfax.
I had no idea there were any flowers in the country.
Oh, flowers are as common here, Miss Fairfax, as people are in London.
Personally, I cannot understand how anybody manages to exist in the country, if anybody who is anybody does. Country always bores me to death.
I suppose this is what the newspapers are calling the agricultural depression, is it not? I believe the aristocracy are suffering from it a great deal at present. It is almost an epidemic amongst them. May I offer you some tea, Miss Fairfax?
Thank you. Testable girl. But I require tea.
Sugar?
No, thank you. Sugar is not fashionable anymore.
Cake or bread and butter?
Bread and butter. Cake is rarely seen at the best houses nowadays.
Hand that to Miss Fairfax.
You have filled my tea with lots of sugar, and though I asked most distinctly for bread and butter, you have given me cake. I am known for the gentleness of my disposition, and the extraordinary sweetness of my nature, but I warn you, Miss Cardew, you may go too far.
To save my poor trusting boy from the machinations of any other girl, there is no length to which I would not go.
The moment I saw you, I distrusted you. I felt you were false and deceitful. I am never deceived in such matters. My first impressions of people are invariably right.
It seems to me, Miss Fairfax, that I'm trespassing on your valuable time. No doubt you have many other calls of a similar character to make in the neighbourhood.
Ernest! Oh, my own Ernest!
Gwendolyn, darling.
A moment. May I ask if you were engaged to be married to this young lady?
To dear little Cecil? Of course not. What could have put such an idea into your pretty little head?
Thank you. You may.
I knew there must be some misunderstanding, dear Gwendolyn. The gentleman whose arm is currently around your waist is my guardian, Mr. John Worthing.
I beg your pardon.
This is Uncle Jack.
Jack!
Dear Ernest,
My own darling.
a moment. Are you engaged to be married to this young lady?
To what, young lady? Good heavens, Gwendolyn!
Yes, to good heavens, Gwendolyn. I mean to Gwendolyn.
Well, of course not. What could have put such an idea into your pretty little head?
Thank you. You may.
I felt there must be some slight error, Miss Cardew. The man who is currently embracing you is my cousin, Mr. Algernon Moncrief.
Algernon Moncrief. Oh! Are you really called Algernon?
I cannot deny it.
Oh!
Is your name really John?
I could deny it if I liked. I could deny anything if I liked, but my name certainly is John. It has been John for years.
This deception has been pressed on the both of us.
My poor wounded Cecily.
My sweet wronged Gwendolyn.
You will call me sister, will you not?
There's just one question I would like to ask my guardian.
Now I have a good idea. There is one question I would like to be permitted to put to you, Mr. Worthing. Where is your brother Ernest? We are both engaged to be married to your brother Ernest. A matter of great importance to us to know where your brother Ernest is at present.
Gwendolyn, Cecily, it is very painful for me to be forced to speak the truth. It's the first time in my life I've ever been reduced to such a painful position, and I'm really quite inexperienced doing anything of the kind. However, I will tell you quite frankly that I have no brother, Ernest. I have no brother at all. I've never had a brother in my life, and I certainly have not the smallest intention of ever having one in the future.
No brother at all?
None.
Have you never had a brother of any kind?
Never. Not even of any kind.
It would appear that neither of us is to be engaged to anyone.
It's not a very pleasant situation for a young lady to find herself in.
Let us go into the house. They will hardly venture to come after us in there.
Men are so cowardly, aren't they?
This ghastly state of things is what you call bunburying, I suppose.
Yes, and the most wonderful Bunbury it is. The most wonderful Bunbury I've ever had in my life.
Well, you've no right whatsoever to Bunbury here.
That is absurd. One has a right to Bunbury anywhere one chooses. Every serious Bunburyist knows that.
Serious Bunburys. Good heavens.
Well, one must be serious about something if one wants to have any amusement in life. What you are serious about, I haven't got the remotest idea. About everything, I should fancy. You have such an absolutely trivial nature.
Well, the only small satisfaction I have in the whole of this wretched business is your friend Bunbury has quite exploded. You won't be able to run down to the country quite so often as you used to, dear Algy. And a very good thing, too.
Your poor brother is a little off colour, isn't he, dear Jack? You won't be able to disappear to London quite so frequently as your winter custom was, and not a bad thing either.
As for your conduct towards Miss Carton, I must say that you're taking in a sweet, simple, innocent girl like that is quite inexcusable. Say nothing of the fact that she is my ward.
I can see no possible offence at all for your deceiving a brilliant, clever, thoroughly experienced young lady like Miss Fairfax, to say nothing of the fact that she is my cousin.
I wanted to be engaged to Gwendolyn. That is all. I love her.
I simply wanted to be engaged to Cecily. I adore her.
There's certainly no chance of you marrying Miss Cardew.
I don't think there's much likelihood of you and Miss Fairfax being united.
That's no business of yours.
If it was my business, I wouldn't talk about it. It is very vulgar to talk about one's own business. Only people like stockbrokers do that, and then merely at dinner parties.
How you can sit there, calmly eating muffins when we're in this terrible trouble, I can't make out. You seem to me to be perfectly heartless.
Well, I can't eat muffins in an agitated manner. The butter would probably get on my cuffs. One must always eat muffins quite calmly. It is the only way to eat them.
I say it's perfectly heartless you're eating muffins at all under the circumstances.
When I'm in trouble, eating is the only thing that consoles me. Indeed, when I'm in really great trouble, as anyone who knows me intimately will tell you, I refuse everything except food and drink. At the moment, I'm eating muffins because I'm unhappy. Besides, I'm particularly fond of muffins.
That's no reason why I should eat them all in that greedy way.
I wish you would have tea cake instead. I don't like tea cake.
Good heavens, I suppose a man makes his own muffins in his own garden.
But you just said it was perfectly harmless to eat muffins.
I said it was perfectly heartless of you under the circumstances.
That may be, but the muffins are the same.
Algy, I wish to goodness you would go.
Wait, I've not had my dinner yet. You can't possibly ask me to leave without having my dinner. No one ever goes without their dinner. Nobody ever does, except vegetarians and people like that. Besides, I've just made arrangements with Dr. Chasuble to be christened at 6:15 under the name of Ernest.
My dear fellow, the sooner you give up that nonsense, the better. I've made arrangements with Dr. Chasuble to be christened myself this afternoon, and I naturally will take the name of Ernest. Gwendolyn would wish it. Can't both be christened Ernest, it's absurd. Besides, I have the perfect right to be christened if I like. There's no evidence at all that I ever have been christened, and I should think it extremely probable I never was. And so does Dr. Chasuble. It's entirely different in your case. You have been christened already.
Yes, but I've not been christened in years.
Yes, but you have been christened. That's important.
Quite so. So I know my constitution can stand it. However, if you're not quite sure about your ever having christened, I must say I think it rather dangerous you're venturing on it now. It might make you very unwell. You can hardly have forgotten that someone very closely connected to you was very nearly carried off this week in Paris by a severe chill.
Yes, but you said that severe chill was not hereditary.
Well, it used to be, I know, but I dare say it is now. Science is always making wonderful improvements and things.
That is nonsense, Algy. You never talk anything that's nonsense.
Jack, you're at the muffins again. I wish you wouldn't. I told you I'm particularly fond of muffins, and there are only 7 left!
I hate tea cake.
Why on earth do you allow it to be served up for your guests? What ideas do you have for hospitality?
Algy, I wish to goodness you would go. I don't want you here. Why don't you just go?
I haven't quite finished my tea yet. And there's still some muffins left.
The fact that they did not follow us at once into the house, as anyone else would have done, seems to me to show that they have some sense of shame left.
They've been eating muffins. That looks like repentance.
They don't seem to notice us at all. Could you cough?
I haven't got a cough.
They're looking at us. What effrontery.
They're approaching. That's very forward of them.
I should preserve a dignified silence.
Certainly. It's the only thing to do now.
Don't you want me, baby? Don't you want me, baby? Don't you want me?
This dignified silence seems to produce a most distasteful effect.
Most distasteful one.
But we will not be the first to speak.
Certainly not.
Mr. Worthing, there is something very particular I have to ask you, and much depends on your reply.
Gwendolyn, your common sense is invaluable. Miss Moncrief, kindly answer me the following question. Why did you pretend to be my guardian's brother?
In order that I might have an opportunity of meeting you.
That seems like a satisfactory explanation, does it not?
Yes, dear, if you can believe him.
I don't. That doesn't affect the wonderful beauty of his answer.
True. It matters of grave important style, not sincerity, is the vital. Mr. Worthing, what explanation can you offer me for pretending to have a brother? Was it so you might have an opportunity of coming up to town to see me as often as possible?
Can you doubt it, Miss Fairfax?
I have the gravest doubts in the matter. I intend to crush them. Now is not the moment for German skepticism. Their explanations appear to be quite satisfactory, especially Mr. Worthing's. That seems to me to have the stamp of truth upon it.
I am more than content with what Mr. Moncrief said. His voice alone inspires one with absolute credulity.
Then you think we should forgive them?
Yes. I mean, no.
True. I forgot. There are principles at stake that one cannot surrender. Which of us should tell them? The task is not a pleasant one.
Could we not both speak at the same time?
An excellent idea. I nearly always speak at the same time as other people. Will you take the time for me?
Certainly. Your Christian names are still an insuperable barrier. That is all.
Our Christian names? Is that all? But we're going to be christened this afternoon.
For my sake, you are prepared to do this terrible thing.
I am.
Please me. You are ready to face this fearful ordeal.
I am.
How absurd to talk of the equality of the sexes when matters of self-sacrifice are concerned. Men are infinitely beyond us.
We are.
We have moments of physical courage of which we women know absolutely nothing.
Darling!
Darling!
Lady Bracknell!
Gwendolyn, what does this mean?
Merely that I'm engaged to be married to Mr. Worthing, Mamma.
Come here. Sit down. Sit down immediately. Hesitation of any kind is a sign of mental decay in the young, or physical weakness in the old. A pride served my daughter's sudden flight by her trusty maid, whose confidence I purchased by means of a small coin. I followed at once by a luggage train. Of course, you must be perfectly aware that all communication between yourself and my daughter must cease immediately. On this point, as indeed on all points, I am firm.
I'm engaged to be married to Gwendolyn, Lady Bracknell.
You are nothing of the kind, sir. And now, as regards to Algernon. Algernon?
Yes, Aunt Augusta?
Is it in this house that your invalid friend, Mr. Bunbury, resides?
Oh no, Bunbury doesn't live here. Bunbury is somewhere else at present. In fact, Bunbury's dead.
Dead? When did Mr. Bunbury die? His death must be extremely sudden.
I killed Bunbury this afternoon. I mean, poor Bunbury died.
What did he die of?
Bunbury? Oh, he's quite exploded.
Exploded? Was he the victim of a revolutionary outrage? I had no idea Mr. Bunbury was interested in social legislation. If so, he is well punished for his morbidity.
Oh no, Aunt Augusta, I mean he was found out. The doctors found out he could not live. That is what I mean. So Bunbury died.
He seems to have a great confidence in the opinion of his physicians. I am glad, however, that he has arrived at some conclusion and acted under proper medical advice. And now that we've got rid of this Mr. Bunbury, may I ask you, Mr. Worthing, who is that young person who my nephew Algernon is holding in what seems to me to be a particularly unnecessary manner?
That lady is Miss Cecily Cardew, my ward.
I'm engaged to be married to Cecily, Aunt Augusta.
Moncrief and I are engaged to be married, Lady Bracknell.
I do not know if there's anything peculiarly exciting in this particular part of Hertfordshire. The number of engagements that go on seem to be considerably above the proper averages that statistics have laid down for our guidance. I think some preliminary inquiries on my part would not be out of place. Mr. Worthing, is Miss Cardew at all connected to any of the larger railway stations in London? I merely desire information. Until yesterday, I had no idea that any families or persons whose origin was a terminus.
Miss Cardew is the granddaughter of the late Mr. Thomas Cardew, of 149 Belgrave Square, Gervase Park, Dorking, Surrey, and the Sporran, Berkshire.
That sounds not unsatisfactory. Three addresses always inspire confidence, even in tradesmen.
Miss Cardew's family solicitors are Messrs. Markby, and Markby.
Markby. A firm of the very highest position in their profession. So far, I am satisfied.
How very kind of you, Lady Bracknell. I also have in my possession, you'll be pleased to hear, certificates of Miss Cardew's birth, baptism, whooping cough, registration, vaccination, and the measles. Both the English and the German variety.
Ah, a life crowded with instant, I see. Though perhaps somewhat too exciting for a young girl. I myself am not in favour of premature experiences. Gwendolyn, the time approaches for departure. We must leave at once. As a matter of form, Mr. Worthing, may I ask if Miss Cardew has any little fortune?
Oh, about £130,000 in the funds? That's all. Goodbye, Lady Bracknell. So pleased to see you.
A moment, Mr. Worthing. £130,000. And the funds. Miss Cardew seems to me a very attractive young girl. Now that I look at her, few girls of the present day have any of the real solid qualities, any of the qualities that last and improve with time. We live, I regret to say, in an age of surfaces. Come over here, dear. Pretty child. Your dress is sadly simple, and your hair seems almost as nature intended. You can soon alter all that. A thoroughly experienced French maid can produce absolutely marvelous results in quite a brief space of time. I remember recommending one to young Lady Lancing, and after 3 months, her own husband did not know her.
After 6 months, nobody knew her.
Kindly turn round, sweet child. No, the side was what I want. Yes, quite as I expected. There are distinct social possibilities in your profile. The chin a little higher, dear. Style larger depends the way a chin is worn. They're worn very high just at present. Algernon?
Yes, Aunt Augusta?
There are distinct social possibilities in Miss Cardew's profile.
Cecily is the dearest, sweetest, prettiest girl I ever saw in the whole world. And I don't care tuppence about social possibilities.
Never speak disrespectfully of society, Algernon. Only people who can't get into it do that. My dear child, you know Algernon has no fortune of any kind, but I do not approve of mercenary marriages. When I married Lord Bracknell, I had no money at all, but I never dreamed of allowing that to stand in my way. Well, I suppose I must give my consent.
Thank you, Aunt Augusta.
Thank you, Lady Branton.
Cecily, you may kiss me. You may also address me as Aunt Augusta for the future.
Thank you, Aunt Augusta.
The marriage, I think, had better take place quite soon.
Thank you, Aunt Augusta.
Thank you, Aunt Augusta.
To be perfectly honest with you, I do not approve of long engagements. To give the people an opportunity to get to know each other's character before marriage, which I think is never advisable.
I beg your pardon for interrupting you, Lady Bracknell, but this engagement is quite out of the question. I am Miss Cardew's guardian, and she cannot marry without my consent until she comes of age. That consent I absolutely decline to give.
Upon what grounds, may I ask? Algernon is an extremely, I may almost say ostentatiously, eligible young man. He has nothing, but he looks everything. What more could one desire?
It pains me very much to have to speak truthfully to Lady Bracknell about your nephew. The truth is, I don't approve at all of his moral character. I suspect him of being untruthful.
Untruthful? My nephew Algernon, impossible. He went to Oxford.
I fear there can be no possible doubt about the matter. This afternoon, during my temporary absence in London, on an important question of romance, he gained admission to my house under the false pretense of being my brother. Under an assumed name, he drank, I have just been informed by my butler, an entire pint bottle of my Perrier Jouet Brut 89, wine I was specially reserving for myself. Continuing his disgraceful deception, he succeeded in the course of the afternoon in alienating the affections of my only ward. He subsequently stayed to tea and devoured every single muffin. And what makes his conduct all the more heartless is that he knew from the very first that I haven't got a brother, that I never had a brother, that I do not intend to have a brother, not even of any kind. I distinctly told him so myself yesterday afternoon.
After careful consideration, I decided to entirely overlook my nephew's conduct to you.
That is very generous of you, Lady Bracknell. My own decision, however, is unalterable. I decline to give my consent.
Come over here, dear. How old are you?
Well, I am really only 18, but I always admit to 20 at evening parties.
You are quite right in making some slight alteration. No woman should be entirely accurate about her age. It looks so calculating. 18 but admitting to be 20 at evening parties. Well, I think you'll soon be of age, so I think your guardian's consent is, after all, not a matter of any importance.
I beg your pardon for interrupting you again, Lady Bracknell, but I feel it is only fair to tell you that according to the terms of her grandfather's will, Miss Cardew does not come of age legally until she is 35.
I do not see to that to be a grave objection. Indeed, 35 is a very attractive age. London society is full of women of the very highest birth who have, of their own free will, remained 35 for years. So I do not think our dear Cecily will be even more attractive at the age you mentioned than she is in present. There will be a large accumulation of property.
Algy, could you wait for me until I was 35?
Of course I could, Cecily. You know I could.
Yes, I felt it instinctively. But I could not wait all that time. I hate waiting even 5 minutes for anybody. I'm not very punctual myself, but I do like punctuality in others, and waiting even to be married is simply out of the question.
Then what is to be done, Cecily?
I don't know, Mr. Moncrief.
As Miss Cardew states positively that she cannot wait till she is 35, a remark which I am bound to say shows a somewhat impatient nature, I must beg of you to reconsider your decision.
But my dear Lady Bracknell, the matter is entirely in your own hands. The moment you consent to my marriage with Gwendolen, I will gladly allow your nephew to form an alliance with my ward.
You must be quite aware that what you propose is out of the question.
Well, then a passionate celibacy is all any of us can look forward to.
That's not the future I intend for Gwendolen. Algernon, of course, can choose for himself. Come, dear, time approaches for departure. We miss 5, if not 6 trains. To miss any more might expose us to comment on the platform.
Everything is quite ready for the christening.
Christening, sir? Is that not somewhat premature?
Both these gentlemen have expressed their desire for immediate baptism.
At their age, the idea is grotesque and irreligious. Algernon, I forbid bid you to be baptized. I'll not hear of such excesses. Lord Bracknell would be highly displeased if you learned that was the way in which you wasted your time and money.
Am I to understand that there will be no christenings this afternoon?
I don't think that as things are now, it would be of much practical value to either of us, Dr. Chasuble.
I am grieved to hear such sentiments from you, Mr. Worthing. However, as your mood seems one peculiarly secular, I will return to the church at once. As I've just been informed, Miss Prism has been awaiting me in the vestry for an hour and 3/4.
Miss Prism? Did I hear you mention a Miss Prism?
Yes, Lady Bracknell. I'm on my way to join her now.
Pray allow me to detain you for a moment. This matter may prove to be one of vital importance to Lord Bracknell and myself. Is this Miss Prism a female of repellent aspect, closely connected with education?
She is one of the most cultivated of ladies and the very picture of respectability.
It is obviously the same person. May I ask what position she holds in your household?
I am a celibate, madam.
Miss Prism, Lady Bracknell, has been for the last 3 years Miss Cardew's esteemed governess and valued companion.
In spite of what I hear of her, I must see her at once. Let her be sent for.
She approaches. She is nigh.
I heard you expect to be in the vestry there, Canon. I've been waiting for you there for an hour and 3/4.
Prism! Come here, Prism. Prism, where is that baby? 28 years ago, Prism, you left Lord Bracknell's house, number 104 Upper Grosvenor Street, in charge of a perambulator that contained a baby of the male sex. You never returned. A few weeks later, through the investigations of the Metropolitan Police, the perambulator was discovered, standing by itself, in a remote corner of Bayswater. It contained the manuscript of a 3-volume novel of more than unusually revolting sentimentality. But the baby was not there. Prism, where is that baby?
Lady Bracknell, I admit with shame that I do not know. I only wish I did. The plain facts of the case are these. On the morning of the day you mention, a day that is forever branded in my memory, I prepared as usual to take the baby out in its perambulator. I had also with me a somewhat old but capacious handbag in which I had intended to place the manuscript, a work of fiction I had written during my few unoccupied hours. In a moment of mental abstraction for which I can never forgive myself, I placed the manuscript in the bassinet and the baby in the handbag.
Where did you deposit the handbag?
Do not ask me, Mr. Worthing.
Miss Prism, this is a matter of no small importance to me. I insist on knowing where you deposited the handbag that contained that infant.
I left it in the cloakroom of one of the larger railway stations in London.
Which railway station?
Victoria. The Brighton Line.
I must retire to my room for a moment. Gwendolyn, wait here for me.
If you are not too long, I will wait for you all my life.
Lady Bracknell, what do you think this means?
I dare not even suspect Dr. Chasuble. I need hardly say that in families of high position, strange coincidences are not supposed to occur. They are hardly considered the thing.
Uncle Jack seems strangely agitated.
Child, your guardian has a very emotional nature.
This noise is extremely unpleasant. It sounds as if they were having an argument. I dislike arguments of any kind. They're always often vulgar and often convincing.
It seems to have stopped now.
I wish you'd arrive at some conclusion.
That's terrible. I hope it'll last.
Is this the handbag, Miss Prism? Examine it carefully before you speak. The happiness of more than one life depends on your answer.
Yes, it appears to be mine. Oh, here is the injury it received through the upsetting of a Gower Street omnibus. An incident that occurred in younger and happier days. Oh, and here is a stain on the lining, caused by the explosion of a temperance beverage. An incident that occurred in Leamington. Oh, and here on the lock are my initials. I had forgotten that in an extravagant mood I had had them placed there. The bag is undoubtedly mine. I'm delighted to have it so unexpectedly restored to me. It has been a great inconvenience being without it all these years.
Miss Prism, more is returned to you than just this handbag. I was the baby you placed in it.
You?
Yes. Mother!
Worthing, I'm unmarried.
Unmarried? I do not deny this is a serious blow. But after all, who has the right to cast a stone against one who has suffered? Cannot an act of repentance wipe out an act of folly? Why should there be one law for men and another for women? Mother, I forgive you.
Mr. Worthing, there is some mistake. There is a lady who can tell you who you really are.
Lady Bratton, I hate to seem inquisitive, but would you kindly inform me of who I am?
I'm afraid the news that I have to give you will not altogether please you. You are the son of my poor sister, Mrs. Moncrief, and consequently Algernon's elder brother.
Algy's elder brother. Well, then I have a brother after all. I knew I had a brother. And who said I had a brother? Cecily, how could you ever doubted that I had a brother? Dr. Chasuble, my unfortunate brother. Miss Prism, my unfortunate brother. Gwendolyn, my unfortunate brother. I'll be a young scoundrel. You'll have to treat me with more respect in the future. You never behaved to me like a brother in all your life.
Well, not till today, old boy, I admit. I did my best, though I was out of practice.
My own. But what own are you? What is your Christian name now you have become someone else?
Good heavens, I'd quite forgotten that point. Your decision on the subject of my name is irrevocable, I suppose.
I never change, except my affections.
What a noble nature you have, Gwendolyn.
Well then, the matter had better be cleared up at once. Aunt Augusta, a moment. The time when Miss Prism left me in the handbag, had I been christened already?
Every luxury that money could buy, including christening, had been lavished on you by your fond and doting parents.
Then I was christened. That is settled. Now what name was I given? Let me know the worst.
Being the eldest son, you were naturally christened after your father.
Yes, but what was my father's Christian name?
I cannot at the present term recall what the general's Christian name was. I have no doubt he had one. He was eccentric, I admit, but only in later years. And that was a result of the Indian climate, and marriage, and indigestion, and other things of that kind.
Algy, can't you recollect what our father's Christian name was?
My dear boy, we were never even on speaking terms. He died before I was a year old.
His name would appear in our list of the period, I suppose, Aunt Augusta.
The general was essentially a man of peace, except in his domestic life. But I have no doubt the general's name would appear in any military directory.
Our most of the last 40 years are here. These delightful records should be my constant study. M generals. Malam Maxbom gosh, the names they have. Moncrief, Lieutenant, 1840. Captain, Lieutenant, Colonel, 1860. Christian names. Ernest, John. I always told you my name was Ernest, didn't I, Gwendolyn? Well, it is Ernest after all. I mean, it naturally is Ernest.
Yeah.
Ernest. I felt from the first that you could have no other name.
Gwendolyn, it's a terrible thing for a man to find out suddenly that all his life has been speaking nothing but the truth. Can you ever forgive me?
I can, for I feel that you are sure to change.
Letitia!
Oh, Frederick, at last!
At last!
Gwendolyn,
My nephew, you seem to be displaying signs of triviality.
On the contrary, Aunt Augusta, I've now realized for the first time in my life the vital importance of being earnest.